now we saw on automation leveraging the REST APIs via the Fabric data pipeline or the Azure Data Factory web activity. In the cases we saw authentication via the organizational account or managed identity. Now let's focus on how automation can be done leveraging Notebook and some other Azure offering called Azure Automation and leveraging PySpark, Python, or PowerShell and leveraging service principal authentication. So in this automation aspect, we are covering everything from user-based authentication, which is organizational account, managed identity authentication, and service principal authentication as well, and considering different languages like PowerShell and PySpark Python, and even REST APIs and modules or libraries as well. So now let's first take a look with respect to the notebook activity now. So now under delete trial capacity, let me create a notebook. Now in Python, in Fabric, there is a library called SemPy, semantic. So SemPy is a Python library within Microsoft Fabric semantic link feature. It contains multiple aspects, right, from Power BI datasets to other aspects. And that you can take a look with respect to the SemPy packages detailed in the PyPy library. So if you see, this is for Microsoft Fabric automation aspect. You can create lakehouse and you can do multiple automation aspects. So in this case, basically I want to get a list of workspaces and the items within the workspaces that are on a dedicated capacity. Meaning, as of now, if you see, I have these many workspaces. Of these many workspaces, only Copilot and concurrency are the workspaces that are on a dedicated capacity. All others are either on Fabric trial capacity or pro licensing aspect or PPU license aspect. So now imagine that I want to get a list of items within the workspace that are on dedicated capacity within my tenant. For that, I need to do an automation. So for that, as I first stated, that I'm using the workspace default. There is a library called SemPy. Within that, since it's already inbuilt, I am importing it and importing the Pandas framework as well. Now within that, I want under Fabric, there is a list items. List items basically returns a list of items in the specified workspace. Now, let me explain what this corresponding line of code is doing. First of all, list workspaces. It returns a list of workspaces that the user has access to. If you remember, when I showed that when you execute the run cell, it runs based on your current account. So when I execute this notebook query or this cell, it would return the list of workspaces that my account has access to. Then on that, I am checking for those, provide me the list of workspaces whose is on dedicated capacity functionality is true. And for those corresponding workspaces, I am getting their corresponding workspace ID. This would provide me multiple details with that workspace, but within that, I want the corresponding ID itself. Now, this might provide me multiple set of IDs in the form of an array. So then I am iterating the list of items for that workspaces in an array. Imagine I have two workspaces. First, I'll scan across the items within workspace 1 and then workspace 2. So for is like a for each iteration for the number of times I have the workspaces that are on the dedicated capacity. And then I'm displaying the corresponding data frame. So the SemPy library or the package has multiple inbuilt functions that are readily available for us to do the automation. Now remember, there are certain REST APIs that does provide me the list of workspaces. Then I had to explicitly write the code as to get the list of workspaces, then filter on that corresponding aspect, etc., etc. So these are inbuilt aspects that automatically take care of those. So now if you see, these are the items and this is the workspace ID. So I can see that two workspace, there are overall 260 rows. Since in display, I can only check the specific one. I can export this data as well into a CSV file. But for now, let's take a look. With respect to this workspace ID 055. If you remember the Copilot warehouse that I had created, correct? Co-warehouse. So it is part of the Copilot workspace. And this is part of the other workspace, which is 8636 concurrency. 2 aspect. So these are all on the dedicated capacity and I am able to get the corresponding output. So team, any queries with respect to this aspect? And you can explore this SemPy.fabric aspect. Within .fabric, there are multiple aspects like fabric dot. There are multiple aspects like if you see, I can create a lakehouse. I can create a notebook. Create workspace. I can delete items. I can execute TMSL language code. So there are too many inbuilt functions that one can leverage. I can list the gateways that are available. So now let me comment this out. df equal to now df. So I have to use it in the corresponding code aspect. So you can explore the different functions that are available within the corresponding I can see that I have 3 gateways. How to check how many gateways I have under manage connections and gateways? I can see that under on-premises data gateway, I have 3 gateways, demo, IaaS, and Data Sharks Gateway POC. Demo, IaaS, Data Sharks Gateway POC. So one can leverage the SemPy package and its internal functions to readily get the details rather than going the REST API route. Remember, within the package, someone has already leveraged the REST API itself. So we are using the end aspect rather than going across manually the REST API route. Any queries?
Nandan, anyone having access to that particular workspace, you don't need like what is the minimum credentials you need to run this? Is it a pro license is sufficient to run these notebooks or call these APIs and get the activities done, or do you
So
need?
it's the user-based authentication, correct? So now, if you see the SemPy library authenticates based on my user account since I am executing this. My account has access to this corresponding gateway, so I'll be able to see the corresponding gateways. But imagine if you want to execute it via some admin account, you can also do that so that it has access everywhere. So as of now, whatever executions that you are doing, it is specific to your account itself. So imagine in the workspace list, it would list me the workspaces that are specific to which I have access to now.
Okay.
It can be a viewer access as well. As long as I have access within that workspace, it would be considered under that aspect. Because currently my current account does not have any Power BI Pro license. It has expired. Can you see your free has expired and it is
Yeah.
not available. So I do not have, but still I'm able to execute it. I'm able to execute the notebook because this notebook is hosted on a Fabric capacity, trial capacity. So my account having license or not is not dependent. As long as I'm able to trigger the notebook, it would give me the details corresponding to my personal access.
Okay. Got it.
Clear?
Yeah.
So rather than going the route of REST APIs, etc., one can make use of the ready-made functionalities that are available within the SAMPy library itself. So this is another way of automating. Automating can be getting the data or creating the workspace as well that we saw, correct? It is not just listing, but you can also create workspaces, etc., based on the parameters that one can pass across. So there is proper documentation that is available pertaining to that, which one can go through. So any queries?
No.
So now coming to, so we saw automation via REST API leveraging managed identity through Azure Data Factory, automation via REST API leveraging Fabric data pipeline using organizational account. We saw automation via Python package through Fabric notebook leveraging my personal authentication. Now let's take a look with respect to something called as Azure automation via PowerShell and via service principal authentication. So for that, basically first step is for me to create something called as an Azure automation runbook. Azure automation component. So under resource group, under search, I need to search something called as Azure automation. Under Azure automation, it is this automation aspect that I want to create. So I'll create an automation aspect. Now I'll provide this automation account a name, correct? Automation API. Now, next, I want to create a system assigned managed identity for that corresponding Azure automation. Next, I want it to be publicly accessible. Next, and then create. So now it is creating an Azure automation component. Now, the deployment got succeeded. Now let me go to that corresponding resource. Now within that resource, you can see that there are modules, there are Python packages. Python, basically one can create a runbook either based on Python or multiple languages. And let's take a look on what that means. But first, let's take a look with respect to the identity. Now you can see that there is an identity that has been enabled. Now I need to use this identity in case if I'm using system assigned managed identity authentication. But in this scenario, I'll be using service principal authentication because system assigned managed identity authentication we had already taken a look with respect to the Azure Data Factory. So now, first aspect is I need to create something called as a runbook. So one can consider the Azure automation as one Azure Data Factory Within that, in Azure Data Factory, how I am creating multiple pipelines. Similarly, in Azure Automation can be considered as the automation account can be considered as your parent, and within that you can create multiple pipelines, and those pipelines are termed as runbooks. So Python and PowerShell are present for me to execute it. So now first let me go ahead and create a runbook. Now while creating a runbook 1, I can select what type of runbook it needs to be. It should either leverage PowerShell or Python. Since we have already taken a look with respect to Python, we'll take a look with respect to PowerShell. PowerShell runtime version, I'll take the latest one and I'll create it. Now, within PowerShell, there are certain modules, inbuilt modules that which I have to leverage. It is which one? Let me go to the PowerShell gallery. Within PowerShell gallery, I can search the corresponding PowerShell. If you see, there is an inbuilt module called Microsoft Power BI Management Workspaces. Then there is another module called Profiles. Profiles is for authenticating or to generate the tokens corresponding to Power BI. So first step for me would be either I can install it during the execution, or I can make it available within the Azure Automation, similar to how we had with respect to the environments. So let me go to the automation itself again. And now if you see here under runbooks, I can see that I have created a new runbook of type PowerShell, which is new. But before that, let me first go and set up something called as modules. Modules are the terminology for PowerShell. Packages are the terminology for Python. Correct. Now, if you see, by default, there are certain libraries or modules that are readily available in the PowerShell. And with respect to Python, as of now, there is nothing. I can add the Python package from the similar to how we had done. Correct. I can explicitly upload the files here and enter the corresponding package name. Or under modules, let me add a module. I can browse from the file or browse from the Python gallery. Now let me browse from the Python gallery. I want Microsoft Power BI Management. If you see corresponding to Power BI Management, I have multiple subsets. I have the entire parent, I have profile, workspace, reports, admin. In case if you want details with respect to reports, it is the reports route. If you want data set, data flow details, if you want capacity details, it is here. For me, the need of the R is with respect to the workspaces. So I'll go with the workspace. Now within this corresponding module, I have these many functions. Get Power BI workspace. Get Power BI workspace migration status. This is to get the details. This is to add a user within the workspace, remove the user from the workspace, etc. So I can do these many set of activities. And I want which runtime version. I want the latest runtime version, and I'll import this. Now it got imported. Now in case if I search for Microsoft Management, under modules, if I search for management, it is still importing. Correct. Once it is available, it means I can leverage that module within my corresponding coding aspect. But parallelly, let me also import another one called profile, because profile is for me to connect and generate token. You can see, correct? I want to connect to the Power BI service account. I want to invoke Power BI REST APIs, get Power BI tokens, access tokens. And I'll import it with the latest version, and it's importing. Import has started. Import has yet not got completed. And it does take some time for it to import. Since imagine this is just a subset. If I would have imported the entire Microsoft management, correct? So workspace is now available. Profile is getting imported, or the import is in progress for the profile. Let me duplicate this tab. Let me connect via my account. So both are now available. Now let me go to the runbook section that I had. In that, I had already created one runbook, RB1, correct? Now, in that, there is an edit option. I can edit in Visual Studio Code, or I can edit in the portal. For now, I'll edit in the portal directly. So now, let me copy the code that I have already created and explain it. So now in this case, I am using service principal account and the corresponding secret associated with this. Now this aspect is not for me to provide you a proper aspect, but to explain you. Is that a good way to provide the password, hard code the password into the corresponding runbook? No. But for us, we are more concerned with respect to how can we leverage Power BI internal modules and functions via PowerShell, and more, and not on the security aspect. So ideally, in case if you want to provide the credentials, see here I'm explicitly providing the hard-coded value of my secret, client secret. Ideally, the best aspect would have been I create a parameter within this runbook. For that, there are aspects to create parameters, or I can create credentials or variables. Parameters are equivalent to variables. I can create a variable and pass that variable at runtime to this notebook and pass the secret value during execution. Or I can have something called as credentials, which is like a key vault version here, wherein I can add a credential XYZ, correct? The username and the password, and that credential can be directly used here itself rather than explicitly stating it here. The second aspect is you can, if you remember, let's interrelate what we discussed earlier, correct? In the Azure Data Factory, we saw that we can access the Azure Key Vault, correct? Via Azure Data Factory through the REST API. Similarly, what I can do is I can grant this runbook access on the Key Vault and via managed identity, get the secret value of that corresponding secret at runtime. No way would I have to manually hard code it. I can get it at runtime. Remember that. Do not try to reciprocate this code as is, because this is not a good way of coding. I had to create it quicker for the demo purpose. Hence, I proceeded this route. Else, as I stated, you can create a credential or you can create a variable. Or the best way is, rather than duplicating the secret present across different way, leverage the get secret REST API of Azure Key Vault and write a PowerShell code to get the corresponding REST, secret value at runtime and pass it to this corresponding variable. So now, just to those, a basic aspect to those who are in PowerShell, dollar represents I'm declaring a variable. So here I'm declaring a variable called application ID, wherein I have provided an application ID. Secure password is basically I am providing the client secret and converting it to a secure password within the PowerShell. Credential is basically I'm creating the credential by logging in via the application ID and the secure password. And then within the PowerShell, this is not authenticating via managed identity, it is authenticating via service principal authentication. So now, if you remember, while importing the Microsoft Management.profile module, there was a function called Connect Power BI Service Account. So there I am using service principal authentication. I am passing this credential that I created by logging in via this client ID, client secret for this corresponding tenant. Then leveraging, meaning I am now connected via this Power BI service account. Meaning I am connected via this corresponding client ID. I have granted this client ID admin access within the API, meaning in the admin portal, if you remember, I had provided a property, correct? That service principal can leverage APIs. So now I am trying to get a list of workspaces leveraging the get Power BI workspace all. This function was available within the module management.workspaces. Hence, for this to leverage these functions, I had to import those two modules. Now, under test pane is to test whether my PowerShell that I have written is proper or not. So I'll click on start. So in this demo, we are leveraging service principal authentication and PowerShell module for the automation purposes. It would take a couple of minutes for that. So by the time this is getting executed, let me go ahead and create another runbook. Let me create a runbook called runbook 2. Similar PowerShell runtime version 7.2. I want to create it. Now, if you see here now, I'm able to get the Power BI workspaces to which the service principal has access to. So this service principal has access to only 3 workspaces. Workspace name access, workspace name delete trial capacity, and workspace name demo workspace. Let's take a look. So access workspace, within that, within manage access, I have an app called app_Power BI, which I have used for authentication. In delete trial capacity manage access, I have app_Power BI. And then finally it was in demo workspace. See, upgrade to Power BI aspect, and I do not have that, unfortunately. In demo workspace, under workspace access, I cannot see because, but it does have access. But in case if I go to other workspaces, I am not able to see that service principal. Hence, only 3 workspaces are visible because that corresponding service principal has access to only 3 workspaces and the corresponding workspace details of those 3 are present here. So in this PowerShell runbook, we leverage the service principal authentication and the PowerShell module. But now we would take in the other runbook, we would be using service principal authentication, but via the REST API route. So this process is similar, wherein I'm trying to connect to the corresponding Power BI aspect via my service principal. Then I'm generating the access token. Now, I want to get the workspace. There is an API to get the workspace details for this corresponding workspace. Correct. So similar to now I am triggering it via the REST API route. So this is the REST API wherein I am invoking via invoke REST method. We saw, correct? Invoke REST method is an internal function to trigger REST APIs, wherein I am passing the URI, which is this header, which is for the authentication aspect, wherein I am passing the token, and it's a get method because I want to get the details. So in this scenario, rather than using the inbuilt PowerShell modules, I am leveraging or I am triggering the automation via the REST API route by using the service principal authentication. So now in case if I go to the test pane and I click on start, it is now generating the access token and triggering the REST API for the corresponding set of details. For that corresponding workspace. So we saw that there are different methods, different offerings, different languages to trigger the REST API. So depending upon what your developer team's core strength is it PowerShell, it is Python, is it low code, no code, UI way, one can trigger the REST API and do the necessary automation. So if you see, this is for the access. That workspace was access workspace. This is the capacity ID. The capacity is present in the southeast region, and this is the one lake endpoint, etc. So remember, you are not restricted to Azure Automation, Azure Data Factory, Notebooks, Data Pipeline. Any offering that supports languages via which you can trigger REST API. It can be Python, PowerShell, even in certain cases nowadays Azure SQL database does support T-SQL queries as well. To via T-SQL queries trigger REST API. There is an external REST API endpoint, etc. So one can leverage those offerings to trigger the REST APIs for automation purposes. So any queries on the automation aspect? Yes or no? Okay. So now we covered Copilot, we covered automation innovation, and now let's cover the final aspect, that is the deployment pipelines. Now, in order for me to create a deployment pipeline, okay. Let's take one route back. For that, you need to have a proper license aspect. And as of now, my current account does not have license. Hence, I'm not able to see the concept of deployment pipelines. So now let me log into another account. app.powerbi.com. Let me use my data sharks edu @yldf7 dot onmicrosoft.com. Okay, let me take a look with respect to my account. It should already have a license. Let me go to the authenticator. This data sharks edu on microsoft.com. It's correct. Okay, let me directly try logging into Fabric. Give me a couple of minutes. Sharks edu @yldf7 microsoft.com. Okay. So I am within the Fabric workspace. Now, in case if I have to go to the Power BI workspace, I can go to the Power BI workspace out. Now, if you see under, since now I have a proper license, let me go to my original account, the admin account. If you see that since I do not have my Power BI Pro license or a Fabric free trial license, I am unable to see something called as deployment pipelines. But the same is available here for my another account since a license is associated with that. So one has to have a minimum of a license in order to create something called as the deployment pipelines. Now, for deployment pipelines, now what are deployment pipelines for? Now imagine that as a developer, I have created my changes in, let's say I have created some objects in one workspace. Correct. So let me go ahead and create some objects within a workspace. Or let me go ahead and create a new workspace. So under workspaces, let me create a new workspace called dev. Correct. Under advanced, it would be under trial capacity. Let me apply it. Now also under manage access, let me add my admin account, Data Sharks, as the admin as well, so that we can take a look there as well. Now here, let me go ahead and create a data pipeline. This is pipeline 1. Within this pipeline 1, I'll create a pipeline with some normal wait activity, just for the developmental purpose. Now here, if you see, under workspaces, I do not have the option of deployment pipelines, or in this aspect. So there are two ways how you can go and check the deployment pipeline. Either via the 3 ellipses here, or under workspaces, you can see the deployment pipeline aspect here. So now let me add a wait activity. And let me save this pipeline. Similarly, within this workspace, let me go ahead and create a, let's say, warehouse. Sample warehouse. Sample warehouse. If you remember, we can implement the synchronize. Now, this is my dev workspace. Now imagine that whatever changes I have made in my lower environment, I want to push it into my upper environment. This is what we call as continuous integration and continuous deployment. So one aspect is that we had seen was I git integrate my workspace and then copy that code and synchronize it back into another workspace. In that way, whatever changes I'm doing in this workspace can get synchronized into the another workspace. So that is via the Azure DevOps route. But imagine if I want to do the changes via the Fabric portal itself, or I want to push the changes from one workspace to another workspace. For that, we have something called as deployment pipelines. So now let me go ahead and create another workspace in which I want to push these changes. So let's say test environment. It's an upper environment, correct? Let me apply and create a new workspace. Under manage access, though this is not needed, this is so that I can even reference it in that admin account. I'll add it as an admin. So now I have a dev workspace and I have a test workspace. Now let me go ahead and create a deployment pipeline. So first I have to create a new pipeline. Then I have to assign a workspace and then develop and test your content and share it with users. So Data Sharks demo. I can add a description. Now I have only two environments. So I have a development environment and I have a test environment. I do not have a production environment, so I'll delete this as of now. Correct? So I have two environments, a development and a test. So I'll create and continue. Imagine that I have multiple environments that I want to push from development to test, test to user acceptance environment, and from user acceptance to production. I can have 4 different layers, stages, or 3 different stages. Now it is asked.
Come again, Nandan. What do you?
As of now, I have 2 workspaces, but as an organization, you would have different environments, correct? You would have a development environment, you would have a test environment, and you would have a production environment.
Yes.
Correct. Corresponding to every environment, you would have a corresponding workspace. Correct. So imagine that if I want to push the changes from development to test and from test to production, there was a third blocker. But in our demo aspect, I have only 2 workspaces, hence I deleted the third block. Clear?
Yeah.
Now, I have to select which workspace I want. Correct. As my developmental environment, I can select the dev workspace. and accept it. So now I'm assigning that this is my developmental workspace. I want to deploy it to which workspace? I want to deploy it into my test workspace, and I'm assigning it. Remember, the workspaces must be of the fabric capacity, meaning let me unassign this workspace. If you see, I do have a workspace called demo workspace that has couple of Power BI reports and changes. But since this is not a dedicated capacity, I cannot see that demo workspace here, because only dedicated capacity like Fabric Trial, meaning dedicated or anything on a capacity and not a pro aspect, would be available for deployments. So for now, let me reassign the development workspace. So now this states that I have a data pipeline and a warehouse in my workspace, which I need to synchronize into here. And I want to deploy it from the developmental aspect. So now I have to okay. So now I have to select which aspect of my source needs to be deployed into my test environment or test workspace. So now if you see here, this states that I have a data pipeline that is only present in the source, that is yet not in my destination. So this is the first time it is creating it. So for now, let me select only the data pipeline that I want to synchronize within my destination workspace. And now let me go to the corresponding test workspace here. Under workspaces, I have a test workspace. So now it's empty. But can you see something? Earlier, when I had created the workspace, nothing got created. But now, since I've added the dev workspace to a deployment pipeline, the corresponding name becomes available there. This is part of development in the aspect. And now in case if I go to my test workspace, I can see that it is the test layer that it is present to. And the corresponding symbol becomes available that this workspace is mapped to a test environment and is being deployed via deployment pipelines. Now, let me go ahead and deploy these changes. And if I want to add some note, I can add it while synchronization. So now the deployment pipeline is copying the data pipeline content from the dev workspace into my test workspace. And the deployment was successful. Now it states that the warehouse is only in my source and it is still not available in my destination. And as of now, the pipeline across the source and the destination is same. Now let me go ahead and refresh this page here. And I can see that the pipeline has been synchronized. Now, in this pipeline synchronization, I can take a look that the wait activity is 1 second and wait 1. Now, let me make some tweaks in the dev workspace. Pipeline 1. So I'll make it wait underscore 1 and I'll make it to wait for, let's say 10 seconds. I'll save this. And also within this dev workspace, let me open the warehouse. The warehouse contains table, and that table contains the corresponding data. Correct? Now let me again go to the deployment pipeline and refresh this page. So now I can see that under my comparison, it is now trying to compare the set of changes. This is only in source and this is different from source. So now I want to synchronize all the changes. I can select all and I can explicitly click on deploy. So this is a different one and this is a new one, meaning different, meaning there is some update. And in that, imagine that I have 5 changes that I want to deploy. Even if one fails, I want to deploy other changes. For that, I have that override aspect. That is, irrespective of whether there is any one failure, proceed with the deployment of the others. Now, this is deploying the corresponding changes into my corresponding test workspace. So let me go back to my test workspace. And I'm seeing that the warehouse is getting created with the same name, that this SWH. The corresponding semantic model is also getting created and the pipeline is also getting updated. Let's wait for a couple of minutes for us to verify that. Also, now I can see that the deployment was successful. Correct? Now, in case if I go ahead and refresh this, under the pipeline 1, I can see that the wait activity would have been renamed to wait_1 and the wait time would have been managed to 10 seconds. Wait_1, 10 seconds. Now let me go and check the warehouse. Within the warehouse, within the tables, date table, can you see the difference here? In the original source warehouse or the dev warehouse, I had the data. But when I deployed that changes into my corresponding test workspace, only the metadata got copied, not the data. Because environments are different. Imagine if your data also gets synchronized, your upper environment data would get corrupted with the lower environment. Correct? So it is only the metadata, or to be more specific, whatever changes are being visible in your Git sync into your source control integration. Correct? Only those set of changes get synchronized into the upper environment. When you did the source control in Git integration of the warehouse, was the data being visible in your source control? No, it was only the metadata, the table definition, etc. So via the deployment pipeline, it's the metadata that gets synchronized into the upper workspaces and not the underlying data itself. Since now this has been synchronized, it is the same as the source. I can check the deployment history and check what all items was available and who deployed it. In case if someone mistakenly deployed the changes, if I want to go and backtrack and go and check the deployment history. Now imagine if I would have deployed across multiple stages. This would have had multiple stages. I can check which stage was deployed on when. I can manage access on this pipeline as to who all can take a look with respect to this pipeline. So now let me add the DataSharks admin account as admin. Let's take a look whether that user would be able to see that or not. I can delete the pipeline. Under settings, I can add multiple descriptions, etc. So this is with respect to the concept of deployment pipelines. Now, in case if I refresh this page, under workspaces, can you see? I'm able to see the deployment pipeline, the DataSharks demo. Now, let me try creating a new one here. So at least once I made someone the admin, at the deployment pipeline aspect. Others who do not have the license can also start managing it. So now under development, I don't want a production environment. Let me delete this. Let me create and continue. Now under workspaces, I am no longer able to see the dev workspace, nor I am able to see the test workspace. Because once a workspace gets associated with a deployment pipeline, a corresponding tag gets associated to that workspace. And that workspace can no longer be used for any other deployment pipelines. So there is 1:1 correlationship between the deployment pipeline to the workspace. Once a workspace is associated with a deployment pipeline, it cannot be used in any other deployment pipelines. Any queries?
Yes, Nandan. Hello.
Yes or no?
Yes, Nandan. I have.
What is your query?
Yeah. So still we are it's not automated na. Manually हम वो
You have to
changes.
trigger the deployment pipeline manually. Whatever changes is being done does not automatically get done in this. It has to be manually triggered.
Okay, so it doesn't follow the CI/CD, right? Concept.
Yes, it does not follow the concept of CI/CD, but Microsoft is trying to enhance it towards that aspect.
So for that we can use Azure DevOps, right?
In Azure DevOps also, whenever the thing is you have to raise a pull request, correct? To change, someone has to do something manually. Even your dev workspace is connected to dev repository. The changes were made in the dev workspace. Now you have to push it into upper workspace. So at that time you have to raise a pull request from your dev branch to upper branch. So that manual aspect here is being done by deployment pipelines. Because there is no code here. Here it directly workspace to workspace. There you are raising a pull request. That pull request automatically is triggering your build and deployment. Here, rather than raising that pull request, you are directly clicking on that button to deploy the changes. It's one and the same.
But CI/CD means like ये होना चाहिए ना कि अगर हम कोई भी changes करते हैं वो auto उधर reflect करे, right?
That is the extreme case of CI/CD. But not every CI/CD is wherein change क्या मतलब instantly हो गया. Correct? It depends on how an organization works. In multiple organizations, there are gatekeepers that are available. Change किया, एक build ready हो जाता है, but there is a gatekeeper who is present who would check whether that change is correct or not. So CI/CD has multiple branches or multiple aspects that depends on organization to organization, project to project. There's no fixed definition कि CI/CD मतलब change किया automatically सब हो जाना चाहिए. I can have my own set of gatekeepers, own set of processes. But the common aspect is rather than manually making the changes and creating the pipelines, I'm leveraging the code from one environment and deploying it to another. You can consider it as that. Clear?
Yes. But
Now, one of the limitations of the deployment pipeline earlier was, let me go to the dev workspace. Okay, let me leverage my main aspect here, the admin account. Let me go to the workspaces. Let me go to the dev workspace. Under dev workspace, under pipeline one, let me make a change. Let me create a lookup activity and let me use a connection to my lakehouse. Connect to more. Let me connect to a lakehouse of my developmental environment, or let's say one environment, correct? One lake catalog. In that, let me connect to a lakehouse, LK1. Now this LK1, let's consider, is part of a lower workspace. Correct? This is the lower workspace aspect. Now, let me save it. Okay. It's taking time for it to load. Okay. So now I have selected this table. Now let me save this. Now you'll understand what is the significance of this library variables in the data pipeline that I had not stated earlier. Now in the lookup activity, I am using a lakehouse of the developmental environment. Correct? Now there is a change. Now let me go back to my deployment pipeline. Data Sharks demo. In the deployment pipeline, now in case if I refresh this page, I can see that it's different from the source. Correct. Now let me go ahead and select this and deploy this change. Now the problem with this is when the code is getting deployed, ideally my requirement is currently my lookup activity was configured to a lakehouse of the lower environment. I want to corresponding to workspace, I want the lakehouse of that corresponding workspace. But now when this deployment happens, it would still use the code of the lower environment itself. I have to explicitly go and make that changes. What I mean by that is, let this get deployed. The deployment got successful. Let me go to the test workspace. Under that, let me go to pipeline 1. A lookup activity got created, but if you see under the setting, it's still mapping to the lower environment ka connection, not the upper environment. I would have a requirement that now since I've deployed it into the test environment workspace, I need to connect it to the test environment ka lakehouse, not the test workspace ka lakehouse, not the dev workspace lakehouse. But with the deployment pipeline earlier, the problem was it used to be hard coded. It used to take the lower connection itself, and I had to explicitly remap the connection and deploy, save the changes in the upper environment with respect to connections. So in order to avoid that, let me go to the dev workspace. Within the dev workspace pipeline 1, there is concept called library variables, wherein I can create a new library variable and a new library. That's where the concept of library comes in at the Fabric ecosystem. So now here, if I click on new item, there is a concept called variable library. So I'll create a variable library called variables_1 in this workspace. Correct? And I'll create it. Now within this, I'll create variables. I want to add the variable name as connection of type string, and I want to set the default value and alternate set of values. Default value, let's say, is X, and I want to add value set Y. Okay. And I'll save this. Now, in case if I go into my pipeline now, I can select the variable name, let's say as X here, mapping to that corresponding library, that variable library that we created. So under here, let me create a new variable. Let's say ABC. I'll select this variable library. Within that, there might be multiple variables, correct? Connect. Now here, under lookup activity, what I can do is I can use a dynamic content. And then I can use the library variables that I declared here. So in this case, then automatically I can pass the corresponding set of changes in the upper environment by parameterizing it. So I'll have the demo ready for our next session as we are at the end of the today's session.